So after playing Battlefield 2042 a few months ago, and even though a lot of players will always be in agreement that that is the worst game in the franchise, I thought I'd go back in reverse order and play through probably the rest of the series, but we'll see. Meaning that Battlefield 5 is up next, the one before 2042. It's good to know that any game I play now will more than likely be much better than the latest entry. However, it seems like opinions are also mixed on 5 as well. Some people quite enjoy it and others not so much. I mean, it has its flaws, but also some great areas. And after playing a good amount, I can sort of see why. Now, first off, there's actually a campaign to this game which I loved, as in I loved that they included one, because 2042 was only multiplayer, which was such a switch up straight off the back, as every other game in the franchise included one in some way, whether that be a full single player campaign or just a set of story missions, which are then all split up into parts. And that is exactly what 5 has done, basically an introduction into the story, which is then followed by multiple war stories, working as a run of mini episodes. I actually didn't mind it this way. I mean, it's quite linear and very straightforward to follow. It's so funny because the last game I played was Destiny 2, which is the complete opposite, and has an overwhelming amount of story to it with endless branches of side content and story arcs. The war stories include the prologue, as I mentioned. That's the main intro to the game where you learn the base mechanics, and then each story is focused on a different character more or less, some more than others, and what I'm saying is that there isn't a main protagonist or a set of characters, which is what you aren't getting from this campaign formula. Obviously this, for some people, it could be a letdown as you don't connect to the characters as much or see any character development, but I was sort of aware of this before jumping in, and I knew it wouldn't be the most immersive story, but it was still quite fun to follow through the variety of missions. But I think the main complaint people had were the missed opportunities. If you couldn't tell by now, the game is all set in World War II, so they had great potential in, recreating some classic World War II style missions, and I think that's what fans expected them to do, whereas DICE wanted to go their own way and try something different, including some lesser known moments and not extremely popular ones, like a D-Day mission for example they could have done, which is quite respectable I suppose, if they did it right, which, well, I'll get into. Now after the prologue, you start off with Under No Flag, but they can be played in any order you like, where you play as Billy Bridger, who is actually an ex-criminal let out and then recruited by George Mason, and he leads part of the Special Boat Service, therefore you work mainly as a duo, and you work to take down multiple air bases all located in North Africa. In my opinion, the gameplay and the mission design was pretty good, but the overall plot just didn't really work. I mean, recruiting a criminal straight out of jail rather than just any other soldier part of the service, it just seemed a bit stupid and quite unrealistic. Again, they were trying something different, I know, but if you are, at least give some backstory to this Billy guy and a valid reason to use him, not just because he tried to rob a few banks and that now makes him a better person above any other soldier. This does allow for some comedic scenes and lines, I guess, just because of how inexperienced he is, like when he can't properly plant a bomb onto a plane so it just rolls off. As I said, the mission design was fun and quite flexible. I mean, you can sort of go about the mission in any way you like because it's very open world. It's not as linear in this one compared to others, and you can go to the locations in any order and in any way, whereas there's also Nordlys, another war story that's all set in Norway during the winter, where you follow a Norwegian woman fighting alone in the snow, and you're tasked to sabotage the exporting of heavy water by the Germans, which they would use for atomic weapon research. But on top of that, you also have to save her mother from being captured. Well, she has been captured already and you have to let her out. I love the mission's gameplay. You can use skis to navigate through the mountains, which was fun, and again, something that had probably never been done before in any World War II mission in a game. And just the whole setting of this Scandinavian mountain range with you being all by yourself made it quite immersive and just different. There was also a good amount of stealth involved, which I tried to do, not all the time, which made sense because she wasn't going to go up against a bunch of soldiers by herself. And overall, I did quite enjoy it. I don't want to say too much to not spoil anything. Next we have a Senegalese fighter, as he tells the story of him fighting in France but looking back on it as an old man. And then he's joined by Idrissa, who acts almost like a brother to him, and you can see this close bond portrayed in the story. And the mission style isn't awful, it's basically a giant uphill battle and you constantly moving forward, mostly in this giant open land. Some could say that that becomes repetitive, but I found it quite fun having that freedom, especially coming off from Nordlies, and there are stealthier and close quarter missions further into that war story. The whole idea isn't bad and becomes a bit more interesting because the story itself, just like most of the war stories, isn't that popular, and this is due to France trying to forget and hide the story from history due to the racial discrimination at the time. So it's cool that they did put light onto the story. And to finish off the stories, there's The Last Tiger. Now this didn't come out at launch, instead it released with the Overture update a few months later, which sort of hinted towards it being a big deal and turned out to be the best war story for many fans, and me as well. I think it's the clear winner for me if we're looking at only the story and the narrative. I probably prefer the gameplay and mission design in other stories, but this one isn't that bad because you get to use the Tiger, the giant heavy tank, which is fun, but we pretty much use it for the entirety of the mission, as it's really your only chance, which I'll get into. So this could be repetitive for some people again, and for me, other stories have more variety to them, which I preferred. I did quite like the setting, as it's set in a city centre with tons of rubble and destructible objects and buildings, you know, falling left, right and centre. You also have to try to repair the tank every now and then, so it has to be stationary in the middle of it all. However, the actual narrative is what carries it for me. The plot itself is great anyway, as it's all set in the last few days of World War II, and you play as Peter Müller, a German commander. Of course, there's very little hope left, and seeing him push forward when he is severely outnumbered, and almost the only thing left is the Tiger, hence the name, to seeing things deteriorate and, you know, come into the realization with some unexpected scenes that make it one of the most gripping stories, so I won't spoil them as much as I wanted to talk about them. But yeah, it's very clear that the last one, The Last Tiger, is the best. Now I do want to talk about the actual gameplay, but more specifically the gunplay, which was such a highlight of this game. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there's big positives but also some flaws, and a big part of why I enjoyed this game is the feeling of the weapons and the shooting, which is of course a part of the positives. It feels so much smoother, responsive and easier to handle than 2042, and that is unfortunately the only game I can go off, but I'll see how, you know, others compare in the near future. However, from what I've heard, many people also agree that this gunplay is the best it's ever been in the series, which is such a bonus to the gameplay. It's just all around so immersive and polished. This also ties into the movement of the game as they go hand in hand. Now, as I said at the start, this is primarily a single player review where the campaign was the main focus. However, from what I've tried in multiplayer, there's such a huge variety of game modes, which is great, and this game has more players than 2042 at the moment, surprise surprise, which means there shouldn't be an issue with matchmaking. Not to say that every game mode will be instant matchmaking, which is a factor, as well as the time of day, the location you're in, etc. For the most part, you'll be fine, and a small but also beneficial addition to the game is the fact that you can browse for servers, which is always the case with so many FPS games. I mean, some COD games have one and some don't, and that's the same with Battlefield, or they might eventually add a main one like a year later. Luckily, this game already has one, which is great. Now, the maps I will touch over briefly. Now, they're better than 2042 as an overall, but what's great is that the game is almost 6 years old, so all the updates and bonus content, you know, added through DLCs and expansions, meaning the improvements they've made are all there, including the new maps as well. The later added maps are actually not bad and work a lot better than most of the base game ones. The performance is an area that I do want to speak on. Now, every single game I've played for videos, that being over 90 or so games, they may have had the odd crash or, you know, handful of bugs or FPS drops, which is still present every now and then in this game. But not one has continuously crashed, not only the game but my PC. So who knows if that's on my end, but from what I've heard, many players have had issues with this, just like in 2042. In that game I was completely fine and I have a decent PC, where all the other games I've done a review on have held up pretty well, so that's why I don't think it's the PC issue. And I didn't have maxed out graphics or anything, but who knows. It just seems a bit odd why this game, out of all of them, is the only one where it's crashed several times, even upon launch, but then it's fine for the next 2 hours. It could just be an EA launcher issue as it happens in the first minute of the game running. Just thought I'd put that out there as a warning, as I'm sure other people will have issues which I've heard of. And that is where I end my review of Battlefield 5 in 2024. I actually did enjoy this game, and it's not like 2042 where it feels like every player doesn't like the game. as there is a fair amount that do and a fair amount that don't. I think it's just not what people were expecting for a World War II game. I think Battlefield 1 was where they went all in, whereas it was obvious from the start that in this game they wanted to not include the typical World War II missions we've all played before, and went down the other route of lesser known ones, which I appreciated, but of course that isn't going to be for everyone, which is a massive reason as to why this game is so overlooked. And of course it's quite, recent in terms of the Battlefield entries, so you're getting the most polished experience in terms of how modern it is, if we don't include 2042. If you did enjoy this video, then let me know by tapping that like button down below, and if you like single player but also multiplayer games, then that's what this channel is all about. I have lots of videos on many games, and there's a playlist of a series I've done in the description if you'd like to support the channel by becoming a member at either level 1 or 2. To gain access to various perks, then tap the join button below. Thank you all for the support and watching until the very end, and that was Battlefield 5 in 2024, and bye bye.